Good morning, everybody. Glad to be here again with you guys. Always a pleasure to receive the invitation and have an opportunity to have this interaction, this conversation. And it was interesting that you mentioned David, because the subject of today, chapter 1, kind of like speaks of the three. What is the word again? No, the revelations, the three revelations, right? And the three revelations are in different moments in history, right? And David is on the Old Testament, and we will talk about the Old Testament a little bit today, yeah? So the first thing that we're gonna discuss a bit, right? This whole chapter is based on this passage, right? Where Jesus said, don't think that I have come here to abolish or to destroy the law. I came here to fulfill it, right? So I guess the first question to you is, does anybody remember when did Jesus say this? In what moment of his 3 years of ministry? Hmm? He said this at the Sermon of the Mount, yeah? And in the very beginning of the Sermon of the Mount. So whenever you see Matthew 5, 6, and 7, that's the Sermon of the Mount, right? And each of those small chapters, 5, 6, and 7, is kind of like addressed to different subjects. And this one specifically is kind of like in the beginning of the Sermon of the Mount. And in the Sermon of the Mount, the very first thing he says are the Beatitudes, right? The 9 Beatitudes. He starts talking about that. And then he says that we are the salt of the earth, the light of the world, and that what should we do with that light? We should not hide it, right? We should expose this light, put this light out. And then he says, may your good deeds glorify the Father who is in heaven. So glorifying God comes through our actions, right? And then he says, I have not come to destroy or abolish the law and the prophets. So this is not only about the law. This is not only about the law. He's also talking about the prophets. And we will understand this better in a minute. Yeah, this is going to be part of our conversation today. He goes on and reinforces this. He says, whoever disobeys even the slightest commandment and teaches others to do the same will be considered the least in the kingdom of heaven. But he who obeys God's laws and teaches it will be counted great in the kingdom of heaven. Yeah? So he reinforces the fact that he's not here to change it, he's not here to destroy it. But let's think about this for a moment, right? So the Sermon of the Mount, chapter 5, it tells you that it's in the beginning of his ministry. It's in the beginning of his 3 years. And in the very beginning of the Sermon of the Mount, he makes this statement. So he's trying to say something here, right? There's a message here. And one of the things that he was being accused since the beginning, right, is this guy challenging the law? Because one of the things that he did several times was to challenge the Sabbath in a way that it was observed. It was so rigid, right, that he was even not allowed to cure in a Sabbath. So, as he challenged and said, was the Sabbath made to man or man to the Sabbath? He was kind of like questioning, is this guy kind of like challenging our laws? And that's one of the reasons he wanted to make this statement very early in the game. So when he says, who obeys God's law, he is being very specific about the 10 Commandments, because the laws were much greater, right? The laws of Moses, they are comprised of 613 rules. Whoever took the time to watch The Chosen here can see several times, right? They're talking about how many laws or rules they have to observe. So it was a massacre, 613. And those 10 commandments are actually part of the 613. They are not out of it. They are part of the 613. And they are distributed all over the five books of Moses, right? The Pentateuch of Moses, which is the Torah or part of it. And they are in the Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They're all over the place. And they were only able to combine them and put those rules in a book like centuries later. At that time, they were dispersed. So as curiosity, right, out of those 613, 248 are positive. They say, you shall do this, you shall do that, right? And the rest of it, 365, are negative. You shall not do this, you shall not do that. Yeah? Many of those ended up in disuse. They are not being used anymore, either because they were around the temple, and the temple was destroyed by the Romans, 72 of the Christ era, because the Jews rebelled and they were destroyed, they were kicked out of their own land again, and the temple was destroyed. So all the rules that were around the temple are no longer used, but also the ones around burning animals, right? The Holocausts, those are in misuse as well. But the Jews still follow 369 rules today. They are still being observed. Some of them are very oriented to the day-to-day life. They talk about visiting the sick, hospitality, returning lost items, diet rules, right? How to eat and what to eat. So they are all part of the rules that they follow. But there are two that we should talk about. And the first one is the Shabbat, right? The Shabbat not only is a rule that's still in operation today, but it's part of the Ten Commandments, yeah? And we will talk about it a little more. The other one is the tithe. The tithe is the 10%, right? That we call dízimo, right? The 10% came out of the division of the tribes when they decided that the Levites would be responsible for everything related to religious practices, taking care of the altars, taking care of everything around the rites that they had. The Levites would take care of it. So they didn't have a remunerated work, right? They would not produce anything. So they had to be taken care of by the other tribes. So they were dispersed. They didn't have a region for them. They were in all the tribes, but they had to be sustained, maintained by the others. So every tribe would give 10% of whatever they had, animals, food. They would contribute with 10%, so the Levites would leave. Yeah? But of course, there was always a little more that would be for orphans, for widows, as a social program, let's put it this way. So that's the reason they had the tithe. But the Ten Commandments from God, Jesus came to fulfill. He was not worried about those other rules, right? But those 10 he was. Now I have a question for you guys. Physically, right, we see the two rocks, right? The two stones. Physically, where would those 10 commandments be? Where would they be? Did anybody here watch Raiders of the Lost Ark? Yeah, in the ark, right? So they were supposed to be inside that ark. And the ark didn't only have the 10 commandments, it also had a basket with manna and the rod of Aaron. So it was the law, God's protection, and the importance of spirituality and religion, all symbolically inside the arch. Where is the arch? Nobody knows. Nobody knows where it is. Yeah, it disappeared when the Babylons invaded Judea, and they destroyed the temple, the first temple, Solomon's temple, and took all the riches, right? And this was taken away and never found again. Yeah? So just a curiosity around the 10 Commandments and where there should be right? Now, another question. You must remember that, or might remember, that in chapter 1, when Kardec speaks about the Ten Commandments, he actually have them there listed in chapter 1. Does anybody know what version of the Ten Commandments he's using? It sounds weird, like questioning that, right? Version of the Ten Commandments. Yeah, we actually have 3 versions of the Ten Commandments. Yeah? And we're going to talk about them. The very first one is the Jewish one. This is the Ten Commandments as they are in the Old Testament, in the Bible. Right? They are in the Exodus and they are in the Deuteronomy. And you must be looking at it and say, Marcos is really getting old. He forgot to put the numbers there for us to count the Ten Commandments. No. That's how they are. That's how they are presented in the Old Testament. Yeah, no numbers. The numbering came much, much later. Yeah, and they would look like this. So it's going to be hard to read, but I'll try. Yeah. So I think the first comment that I would like to make is that on the first and second one, you read, you shall have no other gods before me. So hold that thought for a moment. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. And you shall not make for yourself images, da 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 da. So that is the commandment about worshiping images, statues in general, right? And again, it says, you shall not bow down to these gods or serve them, for I, Yahweh, your God, am a jealous God. So don't give attention to other gods. I'm jealous. Okay, let's keep those 2 in our memory for a moment. And then, you shall not pronounce the name in vain. Then there's a long one about the Shabbat. It's very long, and it says that nobody, no animal, not even foreigners or slaves, nobody shall work on the Sabbath. And that's why they were so rigid about it. And then comes honor father and mother, right? And the other ones, they go as you know, right? They shall not kill, commit adultery, no steal. But then you go like, wait a minute, Marcos, where is that commandment that says you shall not covet other men's wives? It's not there separated as we know it, and we will understand that in a minute. It is all in the last one. In the last one, it says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor you shall covet his wife. Why? Because at those days, the wives were properties. So this commandment is saying you shall not covet other people's properties. In summary, that's what it's saying. All right? So this is how originally they were written. So what happened? We know them different. How did that come about? Well, there was this guy called St. Augustine that around year 300, almost 400, decided to revise the Jewish commandments and make it a little more palatable for Christians, right? And the first thing he did was he consolidated 1 and 2 in commandment number 1 and changed the verb a little bit, right? Love God above all things, worship God alone. In his mind, he said, images are not the problem. We can have images. We cannot worship images. Yeah? And that's why he kind of like removed that. There is a debate, academic debate, I would say, that this was to favor the Romans liking us a little more, right? Because this was right after the Romans accepted Christianism as their main religion. And they were statue worshippers, right? But no proof. I'm giving you theories that are out there, okay? And then do not take holy names. So it goes the same sequence. But he simplified the language to help memorize and help propagate, right? And then comes the change in the end. Number 9, now, since we lost one, right? There should not be 9 commandments. They need to be 10. So he broke the last one in two. And his justification is very reasonable, right? He said that these are different covetings. One of them is lust, which is the woman. The other one are material ones. So we shall not mix them. And he separated in two. One other thing that I was going to call your attention is number 6. Right? Because number 6 on Kardec's version is about adultery. Do not commit adultery. Right? On the Council of Trent, they decided that against chastity was a little more open. And they changed the language, but both are accepted. Both versions are accepted. Right? So we spoke about 2. What's the third? What would be the third version? Well, remember that we had the Protestant Reform. Right? The Protestant Reform decided to revise what we had here and went back a little to how it was in the beginning. So they removed, they included again, shall not make for thyself graven images, prohibition of idolatry. So if you go to any Protestant church or temple, they do not have images. That's what they followed, right? And on the bottom, they grouped again 9 and 10 in one. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, house, possessions, and everything else. Yeah? So one of the reasons I'm talking about this is because, first, they don't teach this in catechism, right? And we, many times, and it's my situation, I do evangelization of teenagers as well, right? And I was researching this to prepare a class for them, and I noticed that there were 2 versions. I said, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then I started researching, and I understood what was going on. So, depending on who you ask, you're going to have a different answer. Also, it helps us understand other people, right? If you talk to a Jew, he will be following that guy. If you talk to a Protestant, he's going to follow this guy, right? And we follow them all, right? So I thought it was important to mention that. Since we were talking about, the Jews and Moses, let's talk about Yahweh for a moment, yeah? The God as they were, the Hebrew God, right? One thing important to notice is that when Jesus incarnated, when Jesus came, they were already fully in monotheism, right? One God. We follow one God, we worship one God, and there is one God. But it was not exactly like that all the time. The Hebrews or Israelites, they had the germ of the monotheism. Why? Because they adored, the idolatry was of one God. But they accepted the existence of other gods in other people. If we go back to see, and that's another series that I recommend you watch, there's a series about Moses in Netflix that is really good. Yeah? If we see the battle between Moses and the Egyptians, right, is in the back or almost in the forefront, I would say, the battle is Yahweh against their gods. Right? So they're not denying the Egyptian gods. Yahweh is just stronger, and he's going to beat them. And that repeats itself when they go and walk around the desert and they go back to the Promised Land. The Promised Land was occupied. They had to take it back. And then it was Yahweh against their God. And it was like that for a long time. Right? So, and that's why I mentioned to you the beginning of those 2 commandments. Because it kind of like says, you follow me, you adore me, you don't look at the others. Because I'm jealous. So it even kind of like understands that the acceptance of the existence of other gods. In the Old Testament, it's very common to see the mentioning of other gods, of the other people, right? And one of the very serious issues that the prophets treat on their books is the fact that many Israelites or Jews used to adore other gods. This repeats in many, many times. And they said, we're going to be punished by this. Stop doing it. And the most common was Baal. Baal was followed by many, and those that would protest against people following Baal, they would call Baal Zebub. Baal Zebub means the Lord of the Flies. And Baal Zebub would become the Beelzebub that people talk about. But it came from the protest of Israelites for people that were adoring Baal. So throughout history, that was a big problem that the prophets and the authorities were trying to address. Whenever something would go wrong in my life, I would go to another god, right? And that was not good. So I mentioned in the beginning that when Jesus came, monotheism was already there. So something happened, right? So let's understand what happened. Around the year 586 before Christ, yeah, the Babylons invaded Judea. Yeah? So, quick parenthesis, at that time, Israel had already been divided in two realms. Right? And this is subject for another talk, but there was the tribes of the north, that what they call Israel, and the tribes of the south, which was Judah and Benjamin. So two countries. They divided after Solomon, pretty much, right? They were not happy with the taxes they were paying. They ended up dividing. The tribes of the north had been invaded by the Assyrians and dispersed. That's why they are called sometimes the lost tribes of Israel, because they were dispersed and they did not go back. They were dispersed, period. But Judea survived. When the Assyrians invaded Judea and they circled Jerusalem, there was an epidemic of something, and they had to leave. So Jerusalem was saved, but not when the Babylons came. They not only succeeded on the invasion, but they destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, the first temple. And they took the Jews with them to Babylon. And there they stayed for a long time. But there's always a bigger fish, right? So the Persians invaded everything. The Persian Empire took care of the Babylons. They went all the way to Greece, where Alexander stopped them, right? But as that happened, Cyrus, who was the leader of the Persians, said, why are these people here? They are not from here. I don't have a problem if they want to go back. So the Jews walk back, go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the city, build the second temple, right? But they are still subjugated by the Persians for 200 years. And the Persians brought what we call Zoroastrianism. There's a syncretism moment here, right? They bring some concepts that become part even of the Pharisees' system of beliefs, right? They brought the concept of one unique supreme God. So that was kind of like the first, right? That the Jews heard about it. Dualism of good and evil, light and darkness, heaven and hell, doomsday, resurrection. These are all concepts that they brought to Israel. And this syncretism happened, and suddenly the Jews are going through a very complicated moment, right? First of all, let's understand that they are in a crisis because, first, they lost the promised land at the north and in the south. They lost Jerusalem, they lost the temple, they lost the ark with the commandments. So they're questioning what happened, right? They say, was Yahweh defeated by Marduk, who was the gods from the Babylon? They are in this crisis. They are trying to understand what's going on. When they hear this, they go, oh, wait a minute. Yahweh is the big God. He is the supreme God. He is the only God. And because we didn't worship Him alone, we're being punished. We are being punished. We were kicked out of our land, and He's giving us a second chance. So we better keep this correct from now on. So when Jesus comes, Jesus gets here, in a monotheism culture already. Yeah? And then comes the second revelation. Right? All this time, we were just talking about what happened before Jesus came. Right? And when we read the first part, right, and these are all Kardec observations, it was up to him to comply to the prophecies that were announced in his advent. So when he mentions the prophets at that moment, he's not only saying, yeah, you should be worshiping one God, right? But he's also saying there are some prophecies you should be paying attention. And I'm going to mention some, and I should have written this a little bigger, right? So Isaiah said the Messiah must be preceded by a messenger. We know who that was, right? John the Baptist. Zechariah said the Messiah must enter Jerusalem in a donkey. Another one. Psalm 41 says the Messiah must be betrayed by a friend. Another one that is fulfilled. Zechariah again, he said the Messiah must be sold by 30 coins of silver. Bingo. One more. Psalm 22, the famous Psalm 22 that Jesus recited when he was on the cross. The Messiah must be executed having perforated his hands and feet. Isaiah said the Messiah must resuscitate from the dead. And Micah said the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem. So there were several prophecies that Jesus came to fulfill. His authority came to him from the exceptional nature of his spirit and his divine mission. He came to teach man that the true life is not the one that takes place on earth. And that is something that we talk about all the time, right, in Spiritism, that the real life is over there. And he came to teach them, or man, right, the way that leads to his kingdom and the means for them to be reconciled with God. So the second revelation comes changing everything, right? With new concepts of where is the right kingdom, where is the right life. But he didn't say everything. He couldn't, right? His revelation was limited by the capacity of understanding of the people that were around him. Spiritism arrives in the middle of the 19th century to reveal in an irrefutable way the existence and nature of the spiritual world. So what he began talking about a different kingdom, we now can understand in more detail. So Spiritism does not destroy the law of Christ, but comes to explain, complete, and reveal the spiritual world. A revelation without a person, and that's very interesting, right? The first two revelations we spoke about Moses, we spoke about Jesus. Now in the third revelation, we have the spirits. We don't have an individual. We don't have one person, right? We have Kardec as compiling everything, making sense to everything, right? Codifying it. But the revelation itself was done by the spirits. And in Obras Póstumas, I don't know how to say that in English, he said that if they were to kill all the spiritists, right, and burn all the books, the spirits would still be there to reveal it again. So you can't actually fight that, right? So to understand God, right, to understand God a little differently, right, the very first question that was asked in the Spirit's book is, what is God? And then we learn that God is the supreme intelligence, the primary cause of all things. And it changes the whole understanding of God. We will go back to it. But here, I just wanted to summarize a little bit the evolution of our understanding of God. When we look at the first one, is kind of like a belligerent warrior God, right? A God that is supporting Israel in the battles. Isaiah calls God the Lord of armies all the time, because that's the kind of protection they were looking for, right? And he's jealous. He punishes. Comes Jesus, he teaches us a totally different concept of God. And look how beautiful this is, right? He replaces Lord of the armies with Father. Does that change the concept a little bit? Right? God is my Father. He's my Creator. And here we understand that God is immutable, immaterial. I like this word a lot, right? Because in many, many centuries, we believed that God was a person sitting on a throne and making judgments and making calls, right? I think that's behind us, right? As we understand that He is immutable, immaterial, origin and support of all things. So this gives us an idea of how we have changed our perception of God in 3,000 years. Yeah? Very good. One thing that also came with the third revelation is that science and religion or spirituality will eventually be together, right? Today we know that we are walking parallel paths, and I was talking about this yesterday. We are calling different names for same things, right? Science is discovering things, they are giving it names, but we have our match here in the spiritual side. We just call it different, right? Eventually, we're going to have to make this translation from one to the other. So, Kardec says the science and religion are the two levers of human intelligence. One reveals the law of the material world and the other one of the moral world. And what do they have to do to walk together? Science no longer must be exclusively materialistic and has to take into account the spiritual element that they insist in ignoring it, right? And the religion no longer ignoring organic and immutable laws of matter. Spiritism is doing this, right? Religion in general is not. But we're trying to find a common path. And some scientists are also finding a common path, but not science. Some individuals, right? Not science. Very good. So, until now, we were in the beginning of the chapter, but we have the instructions of the spirits as well. And in this chapter, we have 3 contributions, right? The first one is an Israelite spirit. Look how curious. In this chapter, the first manifestation is a spirit from an Israelite. He says that the revelation by Moses was appropriate for its time. The way it was the way it needed to be. That's what they needed to understand, right? They were semi-savage people. That's his language, not mine. People that in order to worship God, they needed the offerings. They needed to burn animals. They had their primitive way of expressing themselves to God. It was an exchange, right? I'll give you this, you give me that, right? And we're leaving that behind, thank God. The Hebrew people were God's instrument to spread monotheism. So with that learning curve that we just spoke about, right? They were able to go out in the world and spread the monotheism that we have today. The 10 Commandments brought the germ of Christian morality, and they were not yet ready to understand messages like Jesus brought. Forgiving enemies. That would not make sense to them, right? Loving your enemies, loving your neighbor. This is all something that came to change what they had at that time. They would not be able to understand a spiritual religion. That's what we are, right? We are centered, we are directed to our spiritual being. Christ's revelation initiated a purest and most sublime morality. So the Israelite spirit says, the Christ will renew the world, bring men together and make them a brotherhood. He will make charity and loving our neighbors spring from all hearts and establish a common solidarity among humans. He is of a perfect morality. In short, he will transform the earth And now this is where we connect past and future. He will transform the earth, making it the home of spirits superior to those who inhabit it today, which is us, by the way. Right? Following Christ, we will be able to build the regeneration world that we so much talk about. But it's regeneration, it's action. We have to take the action to regenerate. Right? It doesn't happen by inertia. The revelation of Spiritism, and again, this is the Israelite spirit, the revelation of Spiritism is the lever for the advancement of humanity. Look at the responsibility that we have. The time has come when moral ideas must develop and progress. But he gives us a warning. There will be discussions. There will be hard conversations. But those discussions, those hard conversations will serve to call the attention of people to see our morality and come to like it. Yeah, so we shouldn't see that with bad eyes. And he says, he will impress the spirits, these discussions, right? Who will be interested in the science that holds the key to the future life. And that's the science side of what we do, right? We understand the other side. So that is a light that we need to keep on. The second spirit, that talks about this chapter is Fenelon. Fenelon has a very interesting text there. And in summary, he says, one day, God is in his inexhaustible charity allowed men to see the truth to the darkness. That day was the day of the coming of Jesus Christ. So then he makes a call, right? He's calling us to return to the Master who wants to save you. Everything is easy for the one who believes and who loves. Love fills him with ineffable joy. So he is calling us to pay attention to that. And lastly, he says, don't get caught by surprise. Right? He makes this comparison with Matthew 25 with the story of the virgins. So we should be ready for this transition, right? We should be actually provoking this transition. And I'm totally lost of time. I have no idea. Okay, we're good. The third manifestation on this chapter is from Erastus, who was a disciple of Paul, of St. Paul, right? And he speaks specifically about this guy. We already spoke about him, right? St. Augustine he is considered by many third to Paul, right? And Paul second to Jesus in that level of importance, because he organized so much in the Christianity beginning, right? Including the Ten Commandments as we saw, right? But there's a curiosity about him. He was not always a saint. Right? St. Augustine was a man of the world. I don't know if everybody knows, but he was the son of St. Monica. And St. Monica was always trying to convert him, bring him to a good life, right? But he was mundane. What usually happens with people like that, right? They come to a desert in life. Eventually they will hit a wall, right? Quote unquote, a moment of hell in life, right? A moment of emptiness. And he had his road of Damascus moment, right? He was feeling bad, he was sad, he was depressed, and he started asking God for guidance in a moment of desperation. Doesn't that happen every time, right? So he is there waiting for an answer, and he hears this kid passing by singing a song that he had never heard before, saying the words, Tolle e leggi, tolle e leggi. Take it and read it. Take it and read it. Read what? And he looks around and he sees copies of the letters of Paul. Some people say he saw the Bible, but the Bible hadn't been assembled yet. Right? So he had copies of the letters of Paul. And he takes one which is the letter to the Romans, chapter 13, verses 13 and 14. That specific part invokes the person to abandon vices and passions and surrender to Christ. And surrender he did. So that moment, that road to Damascus moment, changed St. Augustine forever, right? And he became the icon of church that he became. Why did Erastus speak about St. Augustine? Because many people said, come on, St. Augustine said some silly things, and now he is the inspiration of Spiritism. Yes. He was a man of his age, right? He was in the years 300. So he had beliefs of the year 300. But once he is in the spiritual world, he can see the world with different eyes. And he became the most prominent promoter of Spiritism. He has text in almost all books, right? And he's followed by some very important people: St. Louis, St. Vincent, St. Paul himself, St. John, St. Benedict, St. Stephen. All of them have contributions in the Spiritist books. Yeah? So he was not alone. So that's it about St. Augustine. Well, actually, after he converted and he started following Christianism, he is known to be said, after St. Monica died, I am convinced that my mother will come to visit me and give me her advice, revealing what awaits us in the future life. Right? So he was already opening his mind for the future life and what he would hear from his mother. But I would like to go back to Fenelon for a moment, for us to close this conversation. Right? At the end of Fenelon's text, he makes a request, an ask, that is very curious. He says that he invokes us to a new crusade of universal peace, not war. He tells us to be modern Saint Bernards. And he's not talking about the dog. He's actually talking about Saint Bernard himself, right? And there's a reason for it. Saint Bernard was one of the biggest leaders of the Second Crusade in year 1147. He was an icon of that crusade. So that's why Fenelon is telling us, be a new Saint Bernard on this new crusade. Right? That's what we as Spiritists should do. But Saint Bernard has another very curious participation in something not related to Spiritism, or maybe. He is cited in the Divine Comedy of Dante. We are very familiar with the hell of Dante, right? The paintings and everything else. But the story itself talks about all three. It talks about heaven, it talks about purgatory, and talks about hell, right? He starts down there, and he has a similar moment of emptiness, of desert, of hell in life. And then he starts his journey. By the time he gets to heaven, he is transformed. And he wants a chance to see God. And he asks for St. Bernard's help. He goes and says, help me, I want to see God. So what St. Bernard does is he invokes St. Mary. And this is part of the prayer that he makes, right? He says, Lady, you are so great and so powerful that those who desire grace and do not turn to you want to fly without wings. Your loving kindness not only helps the one who asks, but often spontaneously anticipate the request. In thee there is mercy, in thee piety, in thee magnificence. In you is gathered all that is goodness in a creature. Now this man, Dante, who has come here from the deepest regions of the universe, has seen one by one his spiritual lives. Interesting, huh? Beseech thee, by grace so much virtue that it may rise the eyes higher to the supreme salvation. And I, who have never burned for my own vision more than for him, address all my prayers to you, Saint Mary, and ask you that they may not be in vain. Dispel with thy prayers every cloud in his morality, that the supreme pleasure may be fully revealed to him. I still beseech you, Queen, that can do what you want, keep this affection pure after so great a vision. May your protection overcome human movement. So in a sense, not only Saint Bernard is asking Saint Mary permission for Dante to see God, but it's also to keep him humble after that happens, right? And he was so convincing that Mary actually gives him permission to see God. Now, what he sees is not a human. What he sees is an infinite, absolute, eternal, and perfect light. The light represents the very divine essence, a reality that surpasses any form or image. So after this vision, Dante feels that he is harmonized with God and ends the poem with the following line: L'amor che muove il sole e l'altre stelle. Translation: the love that moves the sun and the other stars. Divine love, the force that moves the whole universe. So, isn't it the closest thing to our definition of God? Right? Almost the same thing. So, I'm going to close with a musical tip. This Canadian singer, Lorena McKennitt, I love her. She has very alternative music, and she has a song of her own, right, called Dante's Prayer, which is extremely beautiful. So if you want to take a little bit of this energy to your ride home, right, get your musical platform, find this song and listen to it. It's very beautiful. It's full of metaphors, right? It will deserve some time for you to read the lyrics and connect with what she's saying, but it will keep you in the vibe of Dante's vision of God. Okay? So that's what I had, and I really, again, appreciate the time. I hope it was useful to everyone, and it's always a pleasure to be with you guys here. Okay? Thank you so much.